The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as Sarah Martinez adjusted her combat boots and checked her gear one final time. At 23, she had already proven herself as one of the most capable female recruits to enter the elite training program, but today would test every ounce of her determination and skill. The training compound buzzed with nervous energy as dozens of recruits prepared for what their instructors called Hell Week, a grueling series of physical and mental challenges designed to separate the truly committed from those who merely thought they wanted to serve in special operations. Sarah had spent months preparing for this moment, pushing her body to its absolute limits and studying every manual she could get her hands on. As she walked toward the assembly area, Sarah noticed the way some of the male recruits looked at her. Most were respectful, having learned to judge their fellow trainees by performance rather than gender. But there were always a few who seemed to view her presence as some kind of personal insult to their masculine domain. She had encountered this attitude before and had learned to channel the negativity into fuel for her own success. The head instructor, Commander Reynolds, was a weathered veteran whose reputation preceded him throughout the naval community. His voice carried across the training ground as he outlined the day's challenges. Today, you will face scenarios designed to test not just your physical capabilities, but your ability to think clearly under extreme pressure. Some of you will discover strengths you never knew you had. Others will learn that this path is not meant for them. Ara's heart pounded as she listened to the details. The morning would begin with a series of obstacle courses, followed by hand-to-hand combat training, and culminating in a complex tactical simulation that would require teamwork and quick decision-making. She had excelled in all these areas during her preliminary training, but the intensity would be ramped up significantly today. The first obstacle course was a beast of rope climbs, wall scaling, and crawling through mud under razor wire. Sarah attacked each challenge with methodical precision, her smaller frame actually proving advantageous in some of the tighter spaces. She finished in the top 10% of all recruits, earning nods of approval from several instructors who had been watching her progress closely. During the brief rest period that followed, Sarah overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. A group of recruits was huddled near the equipment shed, their voices low but their words carrying clearly in the still air. "I'm telling you, she doesn't belong here," one voice said with obvious frustration. Sarah recognized it as belonging to Marcus Webb, a recruit who had consistently placed just behind her in most training exercises. "This isn't some game where we pretend everyone's equal. When lives are on the line, we need people we can count on, not diversity hires." Another voice chimed in, equally bitter. "She's probably getting special treatment from the instructors. Did you see how they were watching her during the obstacle course? They want her to succeed so they can make some political statement." Sarah felt her jaw clench, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had heard variations of these comments throughout her military career, and had learned that the best response was always to let her performance speak for itself. Still, the words stung more than she cared to admit, especially coming just hours before what would likely be the most challenging day of training she had ever faced. The hand-to-hand combat portion of training took place in a large gymnasium, where mats had been arranged in fighting squares. The instructors paired recruits for sparring matches, emphasizing technique over brute force. Sarah had always been skilled in combat sports, her speed and technical precision often overwhelming opponents who relied too heavily on size and strength. Her first 3 matches went smoothly, each ending with her opponent tapping out or being declared defeated by the observing instructor. She could see some of the male recruits watching her with a mixture of respect and surprise. But she also noticed Marcus Webb's group becoming increasingly agitated with each of her victories. When the instructors announced a break for lunch, Sarah headed toward the mess hall, her mind focused on nutrition and hydration rather than the growing tension she could feel building around her. She had learned long ago that staying focused on her own performance was the key to success in environments where others might try to undermine her confidence. The afternoon's tactical simulation was announced as the day's ultimate challenge. Recruits would be divided into teams and given a complex scenario involving hostage rescue, with points awarded for successful completion, minimal casualties, and effective teamwork. The instructors made it clear that this exercise would carry significant weight in determining who would advance to the next phase of training. As team assignments were announced, Sarah found herself grouped with several recruits she had worked with successfully in previous exercises, along with a few she didn't know well. Unfortunately, Marcus Webb was also assigned to her team, along with two of his closest allies from the morning's conversation. Sarah could see the displeasure in their faces, but she remained professional, introducing herself and discussing strategy as if nothing had happened. The simulation area was an elaborate mock-up of a building complex, complete with multiple floors, hidden passages, and sophisticated electronic monitoring. Each team would have exactly 1 hour to plan their approach, execute their mission, and extract safely. Real SEAL instructors would play the role of hostage takers, adding an extra layer of realism and difficulty to the exercise. During the planning phase, Sarah contributed several tactical suggestions that her teammates grudgingly acknowledged were sound. Her knowledge of building layouts and entry techniques was comprehensive, and even Marcus seemed to recognize that her input could improve their chances of success. But she could feel the underlying tension in every interaction, as if some of her teammates were just waiting for her to make a mistake they could exploit. The team's approach to the building went smoothly, with each member executing their assigned role with precision. Sarah had been designated as the primary communications coordinator, a role that required her to maintain constant contact with all team members while tracking the progress of the mission. Her calm voice guided the team through the initial breach and the systematic clearing of the lower floors, but as they approached the location where the hostages were supposedly being held, something went wrong. Intelligence had indicated that the hostage takers would be concentrated in a single room on the 3rd floor, but the team encountered unexpected resistance on the 2nd floor that threatened to compromise their entire mission. In the confusion that followed, Sarah made a split-second decision that probably saved the mission. She identified an alternative route that would allow part of the team to continue toward the hostages, while others dealt with the unexpected threat. Her quick thinking and clear communication prevented what could have been a catastrophic failure. The mission was ultimately successful, with all hostages rescued and no simulated casualties among the team members. As they gathered for debriefing, the SEAL instructors who had observed the exercise were clearly impressed with the team's performance, specifically noting Sarah's leadership during the critical moments when the plan had to be adapted. But instead of celebrating their success, Marcus Webb's frustration seemed to reach a boiling point. As the team walked back toward the main training area, he began voicing complaints that grew progressively more hostile and personal. "We would have finished faster if we hadn't had to constantly adjust our tactics," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people think they know better than everyone else just because the instructors are watching." Sarah tried to ignore the comments, but Marcus wasn't finished. His voice grew louder and more aggressive as he continued his criticism. "I'm tired of pretending that having someone like her on the team doesn't make everything more complicated. This isn't about being politically correct. It's about what works in the real world." Other recruits in the area began to take notice of the confrontation, some stopping to watch as the tension escalated. Sarah finally turned to face Marcus directly, her voice calm but firm. "Our mission was successful. Every team member contributed to that success. If you have concerns about tactics, we can discuss them professionally." But Marcus was clearly beyond the point of professional discussion. His face was flushed with anger, and his body language had shifted into something more aggressive and threatening. "Don't lecture me about professionalism," he snapped. "You wouldn't even be here if they weren't trying to meet some quota. Everyone knows it, even if they're too scared to say it." The circle of watching recruits had grown larger, and Sarah could sense that this confrontation was rapidly approaching a point where it could no longer be contained or ignored. She maintained her composure, but began mentally preparing for the possibility that Marcus might do something that would force her to defend herself. What she didn't realize was that their heated exchange had attracted the attention of more than just fellow recruits. A group of actual Navy SEALs, on the base for advanced training exercises, had been passing by when they heard the raised voices. These weren't instructors or trainees. They were operational team members with multiple deployments and combat experience, men who understood better than anyone what it meant to trust your life to your teammates. The lead SEAL, Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, was a compact man with the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of successful missions in hostile territory. He had seen Sarah's performance during the tactical exercise and had been impressed by her composure and decision-making under pressure. Now, as he listened to Marcus's increasingly hostile rhetoric, his expression grew stern. Sarah was still trying to defuse the situation diplomatically when Marcus stepped closer to her, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that only she could hear clearly. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you belong here with the real warriors? I'm going to show you exactly what I think of you and your kind." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, and Sarah found herself shifting into a defensive stance almost instinctively. Her training had taught her to recognize the signs of impending violence, and everything about Marcus's body language screamed danger. She prepared herself for what seemed like an inevitable physical confrontation, knowing that she would have to defend herself if he decided to act on his threats. But Marcus had made a critical error in judgment. His focus was so completely centered on Sarah that he had failed to notice the growing audience around them, particularly the group of SEALs who had been observing the confrontation with increasing interest and concern. When he finally raised his hand in preparation to strike, he had no idea that his action was being witnessed by some of the most experienced and respected warriors in the United States military. The moment hung suspended in time as Marcus's fist began its journey toward Sarah's face, his anger finally overcoming whatever restraint he had managed to maintain throughout the day. Sarah was ready to block and counter, her reflexes sharp from years of training and competition. But before either of them could complete their intended actions, a voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "Stop!" The command came with such authority and power that every person in the immediate area froze instantly, as if someone had suddenly paused a movie in mid-action. Marcus's fist stopped inches from Sarah's face, his eyes wide with sudden shock as he realized that their private confrontation had become very public indeed. Sarah remained in her defensive position, but her attention shifted immediately to the source of the commanding voice that had just changed everything. The atmosphere in the training area shifted dramatically as Petty Officer Rodriguez stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone within sight. Behind him, 3 other SEALs moved with the fluid coordination that marked them as members of an elite unit, their expressions serious as they assessed the situation that had been unfolding before them. Marcus Webb's hands slowly lowered as the reality of his situation began to dawn on him. The SEAL standing before him was not particularly tall or imposing in the traditional sense, but there was something in Rodriguez's eyes that spoke of experiences far beyond anything Marcus had ever encountered. This was a man who had faced enemy fire in multiple theaters of operation, who had made life-and-death decisions in circumstances that would break lesser individuals. "Step back, recruit," Rodriguez said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Lower your hand and step away from your teammate." The word teammate was emphasized in a way that made it clear this was not merely a suggestion, but a fundamental concept that Marcus had apparently failed to grasp. Sarah remained in her defensive position for a moment longer, her training keeping her alert until she was certain the immediate threat had passed. When she finally relaxed, it was with the controlled movement of someone who had been fully prepared to defend herself if necessary. She nodded respectfully to Rodriguez, recognizing his intervention while making it clear that she had not needed rescuing. "Thank you, Petty Officer," she said simply, her voice steady despite the adrenaline that was undoubtedly coursing through her system. "The situation was under control, but I appreciate your assistance." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, noting her composure and the way she had handled herself throughout the confrontation. He had been watching the tactical exercise earlier and had seen her performance under pressure. Now, faced with a very different kind of pressure, she was demonstrating the same calm professionalism that had impressed him during the mission simulation. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to be struggling with the realization that his moment of anger had just placed him under the scrutiny of some of the most elite warriors in the American military. Those who had done this was luck. His face had gone pale, and his hands were shaking slightly as he tried to process what had just happened. The crowd of recruits that had gathered to watch the confrontation stood in complete silence, sensing that they were witnessing something significant. "What's your name, recruit?" Rodriguez asked Marcus, his tone neutral but somehow more intimidating than if he had been shouting. There was something about the quiet intensity of his question that suggested this was not merely a request for information, but the beginning of an evaluation that could have serious consequences. "Marcus Webb, sir," Marcus replied, his voice cracking slightly as he attempted to maintain some semblance of military bearing. The confidence and aggression that had been driving him just moments before had evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning realization that he might have just destroyed his military career with a single moment of poor judgment. Rodriguez nodded slowly, as if filing the name away for future reference. "And what exactly were you about to do to your teammate here, Recruit Webb?" The question was asked in the same quiet tone, but there was an edge to it that made it clear he already knew the answer, and was simply giving Marcus an opportunity to be honest about his actions. Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to find words that might somehow excuse or minimize what had just happened. But surrounded by witnesses and facing the steady gaze of a combat veteran, he found that his usual ability to rationalize his behavior had completely abandoned him. I was angry, sir," he finally managed to say, the words coming out in a rush. I thought she was." He trailed off, apparently realizing that any attempt to justify his actions would only make his situation worse.
"You thought she was what? Recruit?" Rodriguez pressed, his voice still quiet but carrying an unmistakable note of steel. "You thought she was unworthy of your respect?
You thought she didn't belong here? You thought you had the right to assault a fellow service member because you disagreed with military policy?" Each question hit Marcus like a physical blow, and Sarah could see him visibly shrinking under the weight of the SEAL's steady interrogation. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. He had clearly decided that this moment represented an opportunity for a broader lesson that went beyond just Marcus's individual actions. "I want all of you to listen carefully," Rodriguez said, raising his voice so that every recruit in the area could hear him clearly. "Because what just happened here tells me that some of you have fundamentally misunderstood what it means to be part of this community." The other SEALs moved closer, forming a loose circle around the gathered recruits. Sarah found herself positioned between Rodriguez and Marcus, still alert, but no longer in a defensive stance. She could sense that whatever was about to happen would be significant for everyone present, not just the two individuals who had been directly involved in the confrontation. "This recruit," Rodriguez continued, gesturing toward Sarah, "just completed a tactical exercise with distinction. She demonstrated leadership, quick thinking, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances under pressure. These are exactly the qualities we need in special operations personnel, regardless of their gender, background, or any other factor that has nothing to do with their ability to complete the mission." He paused, allowing his words to sink in before continuing. "But more importantly, she is your teammate. In this training environment, in operational deployments, in every situation where you might find yourselves serving together, the person standing next to you is not your competition or your enemy. They are the person who might save your life, or whose life might depend on your actions." Marcus was staring at the ground, his face burning with shame as the full impact of his behavior became clear. But Rodriguez wasn't done with him yet. There was clearly a larger point to be made, and Marcus's actions had provided the perfect opportunity to address issues that went far beyond this single incident. "Recruit Webb," Rodriguez said, focusing his attention back on Marcus. "Do you know what happens to team members who can't trust each other? Do you have any idea what it's like to be in a combat situation where you have to question whether the person next to you is going to have your back when things get dangerous?" Marcus shook his head, still not meeting Rodriguez's eyes. The SEAL's question had clearly struck at something fundamental about military service that Marcus had never fully considered. His focus had been so centered on his own feelings about Sarah's presence that he had apparently never thought about the broader implications of his attitude. "I've seen good people die because someone on their team was more concerned with their personal opinions than with the mission," Rodriguez continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I've seen operations fail because individuals decided that their prejudices were more important than their training. And I've seen careers destroyed because people couldn't set aside their personal issues and function as part of a unit." The weight of these words was clearly having an impact on Marcus, but Rodriguez could see that the lesson needed to extend to the other recruits as well. Some of them were nodding in understanding, but others still seemed to be struggling with concepts that should have been fundamental to their military training. Sarah remained silent throughout this exchange, recognizing that her role was to let the SEAL handle the situation in whatever way he deemed appropriate. But she was also keenly aware of the dynamics playing out around her. Some of the recruits were clearly reassessing their own attitudes based on what they were hearing, while others seemed defensive or uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "The person you were about to assault," Rodriguez said to Marcus, "has already proven herself more capable than many of the recruits in your class. She's demonstrated leadership under pressure, technical competence, and the kind of judgment that saves lives in operational environments. Yet you were prepared to attack her based on your personal feelings about women in the military. Marcus finally looked up, meeting Rodriguez's eyes for the first time since the confrontation had begun. What he saw there was not anger or hatred, but something that might have been worse: disappointment. This was a man who had dedicated his life to excellence in military service, and Marcus's actions represented everything that was antithetical to the values Rodriguez held most dear. "I want you to understand something very clearly," Rodriguez continued. "Your personal opinions about gender integration, diversity policies, or anything else related to military personnel decisions are completely irrelevant. Your job is to be the best service member you can possibly be and to support your teammates in being the best they can be. Nothing else matters." The crowd of watching recruits had grown larger as word of the confrontations spread throughout the training facility. Several instructors had also arrived, standing at a respectful distance but clearly prepared to intervene if necessary. Sarah could see that this incident was rapidly becoming something much bigger than just a disagreement between two trainees. Rodriguez seemed to sense this as well, and he clearly decided to use the opportunity to address the broader issues that Marcus's actions had brought to light. "How many of you have questions or concerns about serving alongside female personnel?" he asked the assembled recruits directly. The question hung in the air for a long moment as recruits looked around at each other, clearly uncertain about whether they should respond honestly or give what they thought might be the expected answer. Sarah found herself holding her breath, curious to see how many of her fellow trainees would admit to harboring doubts about her capabilities. Finally, several hands went up tentatively. Rodriguez nodded approvingly at their honesty, making it clear that he appreciated their willingness to acknowledge their concerns, rather than pretending they didn't exist. "Good," he said. "Honest questions are always better than hidden resentments." One of the recruits, a young man named Davidson, who had always been respectful in his interactions with Sarah, raised his hand higher. "Petty officer, I don't have any problem with women in the military, but I do worry about whether the physical standards are the same for everyone. How do we know that someone can handle the demands of a real mission?" Rodriguez smiled slightly, apparently pleased that the question had been asked respectfully and without hostility. That's exactly the kind of concern that should be addressed through training and evaluation, not through assumptions or prejudice. The standards for special operations are demanding for a reason, and everyone who meets those standards has earned their place regardless of their gender. He gestured toward Sarah. This recruit has consistently met or exceeded every standard that has been set for her. She's demonstrated physical capability, mental toughness, and tactical competence. If you have concerns about her abilities, those concerns should be based on her actual performance, not on your preconceptions about women in general. Another recruit spoke up from the back of the group. "But what about unit cohesion? I've heard that having women in special operations units can create problems with team dynamics and discipline." Rodriguez's expression grew more serious at this question, and Sarah could sense that this was a topic he had dealt with extensively throughout his career. "Unit cohesion depends on mutual respect, shared commitment to the mission, and trust in each other's capabilities," he said firmly. "It has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character." He paused, looking around at the faces of the assembled recruits. The biggest threat to unit cohesion is exactly what we just witnessed here. When someone decides that their personal prejudices are more important than their professional obligations, that's when teams break down. When someone can't see past their own biases to recognize the value of their teammates, that's when people get hurt. Marcus, who had been standing in increasingly uncomfortable silence throughout this discussion, finally found his voice again. "I understand what you're saying, sir," he said quietly, "but it's hard to change the way you've always thought about things. I grew up believing that some jobs were just naturally better suited for men." Rodriguez studied him for a moment before responding. "I appreciate your honesty, Recruit Webb, and you're right that changing deeply held beliefs is difficult. But that's exactly what military service requires sometimes. We don't get to choose our teammates based on our personal preferences or cultural backgrounds. We work with the people we're assigned to work with, and we find ways to be successful together." Sarah had remained silent throughout most of this exchange, but now she felt compelled to speak. Not to defend herself, Rodriguez had done that more effectively than she ever could have, but to address some of the underlying issues that seemed to be affecting several of her fellow recruits. "If I may, petty officer," she said, waiting for Rodriguez's nod before continuing. I think some of the concern comes from people not really knowing what to expect when they're working with someone different from themselves. I grew up with 3 brothers who all served in the military, and I understand that most of these guys haven't had much experience working closely with women in high-stress situations. She looked around at the assembled recruits, making eye contact with several who had asked questions. I don't expect special treatment, and I don't want to be judged by different standards. I just want the same opportunity to prove myself that everyone else has. If I can't meet the standards, then I shouldn't be here. But if I can meet them, then my gender shouldn't matter. The simplicity and directness of her statement seemed to resonate with many of the recruits, including some who had seemed skeptical earlier. Rodriguez nodded approvingly at her words, clearly impressed with her ability to address the situation without defensiveness or hostility. That, Rodriguez said firmly, is exactly the right attitude. Excellence is not about meeting different standards for different people. It's about everyone meeting the same high standards regardless of their background. And from what I've observed today, this recruit is well on her way to doing exactly that. The tension in the training area had shifted dramatically as the impromptu lesson continued. What had begun as a personal confrontation between 2 recruits had evolved into something much more significant. A teaching moment that was clearly resonating with everyone present. Rodriguez could see that his words were having an impact, but he also recognized that real change would require more than just a single conversation. I want to tell you all a story, Rodriguez said, his voice taking on a different quality as he settled into what was clearly going to be a more extended narrative. About 6 months ago, my team was deployed to a location I can't name, for a mission I can't describe in detail. What I can tell you is that we were in a situation where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. The recruits gathered closer, sensing that they were about to hear something that would give them insight into the realities of special operations that no classroom instruction could provide. Sarah found herself genuinely curious about where this story was heading, and even Marcus seemed to have forgotten his earlier embarrassment as he focused on Rodriguez's words. Our intelligence was faulty, our extraction plan fell apart, and we found ourselves cut off from support with multiple hostile forces closing in on our position. Rodriguez continued. We had wounded team members, limited ammunition, and no clear route to safety. It was exactly the kind of situation that tests everything you think you know about yourself and your teammates. Rodriguez paused, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in before continuing. Our communication specialist was a female petty officer named Jensen. She was maybe 5 feet 4 inches tall, couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds, and some people had questioned whether she belonged in special operations from the day she arrived at our unit. Sarah could see where this was heading, but she remained silent, recognizing that Rodriguez's story would be far more powerful than any argument she could make on her own behalf. Marcus was clearly listening intently, his earlier defensiveness replaced by genuine curiosity about how this situation had played out. When our primary communications equipment was damaged by enemy fire, Jensen improvised a solution using equipment that wasn't designed to work together. She managed to establish contact with our support base and coordinate a rescue operation while under direct enemy fire. Her quick thinking and technical expertise probably saved all of our lives. Rodriguez looked around at the assembled recruits, making sure his point was clear. But that's not the most important part of the story. The most important part is what happened next. Jensen was wounded during the firefight, and one of our team members, a guy who had been one of her biggest critics, carried her to the extraction point while continuing to provide covering fire for the rest of the team. The image he was painting was clearly having an impact on the listening recruits. Sarah could see several of them nodding as they began to understand the point Rodriguez was making. Even Marcus seemed to be reconsidering some of his earlier assumptions. When we debriefed after that mission, that same team member told me that working with Jensen had completely changed his perspective on women in special operations, not because she had proven she was as good as a man, but because she had proven she was an excellent operator, period. Her gender had become completely irrelevant in the face of her competence and dedication. Rodriguez's story was clearly reaching its intended audience, but Sarah could see that he wasn't finished yet. There was something else he wanted to convey. Something that went beyond just the question of gender integration in the military. The real lesson from that mission, Rodriguez continued, was about the danger of making assumptions about people based on characteristics that have nothing to do with their abilities. If we had written Jensen off because of her size or her gender, we would have missed out on having one of the most technically skilled communication specialists in the Navy on our team. He looked directly at Marcus as he spoke his next words. And if that team member had maintained his prejudices and refused to work effectively with Jensen, people would have died. His personal opinions about women in the military would have mattered a lot less than the fact that his teammates were counting on him to put the mission first. Marcus nodded slowly, clearly beginning to understand the broader implications of his earlier behavior. But Sarah could see that he was still struggling with something, still trying to reconcile his long-held beliefs with the reality he was being asked to accept. "I understand what you're saying, sir," Marcus said hesitantly. "But how do you get past years of thinking one way? How do you just suddenly change your mind about something you've always believed?" Rodriguez smiled slightly, apparently pleased that Marcus was engaging with the issue rather than just shutting down defensively. "You don't change your mind suddenly," he said. "You change it gradually, by focusing on facts instead of assumptions, and by judging people based on their actions rather than your preconceptions." One of the other SEALs who had been standing nearby decided to join the conversation. Petty Officer Thompson was taller than Rodriguez, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of multiple deployments in harsh environments. "Can I add something to that story?" he asked Rodriguez, who nodded approvingly. "I was on that same mission," Thompson said, looking around at the recruits. "And I want you to understand that none of us went into it thinking about gender politics or social engineering. We went in as a team, focused on completing our mission and bringing everyone home safely. Jensen was our communications specialist because she was the best person for that job, not because someone was trying to make a statement." Thompson's perspective added another layer to the story, emphasizing the practical realities of special operations in a way that clearly resonated with the assembled recruits. Sarah could see that having multiple SEALs confirm the same basic message was having a powerful impact on everyone present. "But here's what I think is most important," Thompson continued. "After that mission, nobody on our team ever questioned Jensen's presence again. Not because she had proven herself to the critics, but because we had all proven ourselves as a team. We had demonstrated that we could work together effectively regardless of our individual backgrounds. The third SEAL, Chief Petty Officer Williams, was the most senior of the group and had been observing the entire conversation with the quiet intensity that marked him as someone with extensive leadership experience. Now he stepped forward, clearly feeling that there was something else that needed to be addressed. "I've been in the Navy for 15 years, Williams said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen virtually every challenge the military could present. And I've watched this organization evolve and improve in ways that have made us more effective, not less. The integration of women into special operations is just one example of how the military adapts to take advantage of the best talent available." Williams looked directly at Sarah as he continued. "But I also want to be clear that this isn't about lowering standards or making accommodations. It's about recognizing that excellence comes in many different forms, and that our previous assumptions about who could excel in special operations were limiting our ability to build the best possible teams." Sarah appreciated Williams' directness, but she also sensed that there was more he wanted to say. As the most senior person present, his words carried particular weight with the recruits, and she could see that they were listening to him with special attention. "The recruit who just demonstrated exceptional performance in the tactical exercise," Williams said, gesturing toward Sarah, "didn't succeed because we changed the standards for her. She succeeded because she met the same standards that everyone else has to meet, and she did it through the same kind of hard work and dedication that we expect from all special operations personnel." Marcus had been listening to all of this with obvious discomfort, but now he seemed to have reached some kind of internal decision point. "Chief," he said hesitantly, "I think I've been looking at this all wrong. I was so focused on what I thought about women in the military that I never really considered what the mission required." Williams nodded approvingly at Marcus's admission. "That's a good start, recruit. But understanding the problem is only the first step. The real test is whether you can work effectively with all of your teammates, regardless of whether they match your previous expectations." The conversation was clearly reaching a natural conclusion, but Rodriguez had one more point he wanted to make. "I want all of you to understand that what happened here today could have had serious consequences for everyone involved. If we hadn't intervened when we did, we might have been dealing with assault charges, medical injuries, and the destruction of multiple military careers. His words served as a sobering reminder that the stakes of military service extended far beyond personal preferences or individual comfort levels. Sarah could see that several of the recruits were clearly sobered by the realization of just how close Marcus had come to making a catastrophic mistake. But more importantly, Rodriguez continued, this kind of division within a unit is exactly what gets people killed in operational environments. If you can't trust your teammates, if you can't work together effectively, if you're more focused on your personal issues than on the mission, then you have no business wearing the uniform. The training facility had grown quiet except for Rodriguez's voice, and Sarah could sense that everyone present understood they were witnessing something significant. This wasn't just a disciplinary action or a routine training exercise. It was a defining moment that would influence how this group of recruits approached their military careers. From this point forward, Rodriguez said firmly, I want every person in this training program to understand that your success will be measured by your ability to work effectively with whatever team you're assigned to. Your personal opinions about your teammates are irrelevant. Your ability to complete the mission is everything. Marcus stood at attention, his earlier anger completely replaced by what appeared to be genuine remorse and a dawning understanding of the magnitude of his error. Sir, he said formally, I request permission to apologize to my teammate for my unprofessional behavior. Rodriguez considered this request for a moment before nodding. Permission granted, recruit? But I want you to understand that an apology is just words, unless it's followed by consistent professional behavior. Marcus turned to face Sarah directly, his expression serious and his voice steady. Sarah, I owe you a sincere apology for my behavior today. You've proven yourself to be an excellent service member and a valuable teammate, and I let my personal prejudices cloud my judgment. I was wrong, and I'm committed to being a better teammate going forward. Sarah studied his face for a moment, trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. What she saw there was embarrassment, certainly, but also what appeared to be genuine recognition that he had made a serious mistake. Apology accepted, Marcus, she said simply. I look forward to working with you as a teammate. The exchange was brief, but seemed to satisfy Rodriguez and the other SEALs that the immediate crisis had been resolved. But Sarah could sense that the broader issues raised by this incident would continue to influence the dynamics within their training group for some time to come. As the crowd of recruits began to disperse, Rodriguez approached Sarah privately. How are you doing? He asked quietly, his tone shifting from the authoritative voice he had used during the confrontation to something more personal and concerned. I'm fine, sir, Sarah replied honestly. I've dealt with similar situations before, and I was prepared to handle this one if necessary. But I appreciate your intervention. Having the support of experienced personnel like yourself makes a significant difference. Rodriguez nodded, clearly satisfied with her response. You handled yourself well throughout this entire situation. Your composure under pressure and your willingness to work toward a resolution rather than escalate the conflict are exactly the qualities we need in special operations personnel. His words meant more to Sarah than she could easily express, coming as they did from someone whose experience and expertise were beyond question. But she also recognized that the real test would come in the days and weeks ahead as she and her fellow recruits continued to work together in increasingly challenging training scenarios. The weeks following the confrontation brought a noticeable shift in the atmosphere of the training program. Sarah observed her fellow recruits with careful attention, noting how the intervention by Rodriguez and his team had created ripple effects that extended far beyond just Marcus's behavior. The incident had forced everyone in the program to examine their own attitudes and assumptions about teamwork and military service. Marcus himself had undergone what appeared to be a genuine transformation. Rather than simply avoiding Sarah or treating her with wary politeness, he had begun actively working to prove that his apology had been sincere. During team exercises, he consistently supported her suggestions and acknowledged her contributions without any apparent reluctance. More importantly, he had started speaking up when other recruits made comments that questioned her place in the program. The change in Marcus was most evident during a particularly challenging urban warfare simulation that took place 3 weeks after the original incident. The exercise required teams to clear a multi-story building while facing sophisticated opposition and time pressure. Sarah found herself assigned as the team leader, a role that would test not only her tactical abilities, but also her capability to command respect from recruits who might still harbor doubts about her authority. As the team prepared for the mission, Sarah noticed Marcus paying close attention to her briefing and asking thoughtful questions about the tactical plan. His engagement was clearly genuine, and she could see that other team members were taking note of his attitude. When one recruit made a subtle comment questioning whether someone with her physical limitations could effectively lead in this type of scenario, Marcus immediately stepped in to redirect the discussion toward tactical considerations rather than personal characteristics. "The layout of this building favors speed and coordination over brute force," Marcus said firmly. "Sarah's approach to systematic clearing and communication protocols gives us the best chance of success. Let's focus on executing the plan rather than second-guessing our team leader." His support was both unexpected and deeply appreciated, but Sarah was careful not to let her gratitude interfere with her responsibility to lead the team effectively. The mission itself proved to be one of the most challenging they had faced, with multiple unexpected obstacles and a sophisticated opposition force that tested every aspect of their training. Sarah's leadership during the exercise was methodical and decisive. When the original plan encountered unexpected resistance, she quickly adapted their approach while maintaining clear communication with all team members. Her ability to process information under pressure and make rapid tactical decisions impressed not only her teammates, but also the SEAL instructors who were observing the exercise. The mission was ultimately successful, with the team achieving all objectives within the time limit and with minimal simulated casualties. During the debrief session that followed, the lead instructor specifically noted Sarah's leadership performance and the team's ability to function cohesively under pressure. Marcus was among the first to acknowledge her contribution, setting a tone that made it clear his support was based on professional respect rather than political correctness. But the most significant development came during a conversation Sarah overheard between Marcus and another recruit who had not been present during the original confrontation. The newer recruit, Jackson, had apparently been expressing some of the same concerns that Marcus had voiced weeks earlier. "I'm just saying that having women in special operations changes the dynamic," Jackson was arguing. "Guys act differently when there are women around, and that could be dangerous in combat situations." Sarah paused outside the equipment room where the conversation was taking place, curious to hear how Marcus would respond to arguments that he himself had been making just a few weeks earlier. "You know what really changes team dynamics," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a confidence that Sarah had not heard from him before. "Having team members who are more concerned with their personal opinions than with mission success. I learned that lesson the hard way recently." Jackson seemed surprised by Marcus's response. "But surely you understand what I'm talking about. Some jobs are just naturally better suited for men. It's not sexist, it's just reality." "The only reality that matters," Marcus said firmly, "is whether someone can do the job. Sarah Martinez has consistently outperformed most of the guys in this program, including me. She's a better leader, a better tactician, and a better teammate than I was when I was focused on her gender instead of her abilities." Sarah was genuinely moved by Marcus's defense of her capabilities, but she was also impressed by the broader point he was making about the importance of focusing on performance rather than preconceptions. His transformation from antagonist to ally had been remarkable, but more importantly, it seemed to be based on a genuine change in his understanding of what military service required. The conversation between Marcus and Jackson continued, with Marcus sharing some of the insights he had gained from Rodriguez and the other SEALs during the intervention. Sarah could hear him explaining the importance of unit cohesion and the danger of allowing personal prejudices to interfere with professional responsibilities. It was clear that the lessons from that day had resonated with him far more deeply than she had initially realized. As the training program continued, Sarah began to notice similar changes in other recruits as well. The intervention by the SEALs had not just resolved the immediate crisis with Marcus, but had sparked broader conversations throughout the program about teamwork, excellence, and the values that should guide military service. Several recruits who had never openly questioned her presence began approaching her for advice on tactical problems or seeking her input on training exercises. The shift was perhaps most noticeable during a major field exercise that took place 6 weeks after the original incident. The scenario involved a complex multi-day operation that required teams to work together across different phases of a simulated mission. Sarah found herself naturally emerging as one of the informal leaders among the recruits, not because of any official designation, but because her consistent performance had earned the respect of her peers. During one particularly difficult phase of the exercise, when several teams were struggling with coordination problems and communication breakdowns, Sarah took the initiative to propose a solution that would require unprecedented cooperation between groups that had previously operated independently. Her suggestion was initially met with skepticism from some quarters, but Marcus and several other recruits who had worked with her before immediately endorsed the plan. The successful implementation of Sarah's coordinated approach not only salvaged what had been developing into a failed exercise, but demonstrated to all participants the value of collaborative leadership and innovative thinking. The instructors later cited the exercise as an example of how the right leadership could transform a group of individuals into an effective team. Rodriguez and his fellow SEALs made several more visits to the training facility during the weeks that followed, ostensibly to observe advanced exercises, but clearly also to check on the progress of the recruits they had taken such an interest in. During one such visit, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation about her plans for the future. "I've been watching your development since our conversation," Rodriguez said without preamble. "Your performance has been consistently impressive. But more importantly, your ability to bring out the best in your teammates suggests that you have real leadership potential." Sarah appreciated the feedback, but she was also curious about why Rodriguez was taking such a personal interest in her career development. "Thank you, sir. I've learned a great deal from observing how you handled the situation with Marcus. The way you turned a confrontation into a teaching moment was exactly the kind of leadership I hoped to develop." Rodriguez smiled at her response. "That situation could have gone very differently if you had handled it poorly. Your composure under pressure and your willingness to focus on solutions rather than blame were crucial to achieving a positive outcome. Those are qualities that will serve you well in operational environments." Their conversation continued for several more minutes, with Rodriguez sharing insights about the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead for special operations personnel. He spoke about the evolving nature of military threats and the importance of building teams that could adapt to changing circumstances. But underlying his comments was a clear message that he saw Sarah as someone who could contribute significantly to the future of special operations. As the training program neared its conclusion, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational day when Marcus had nearly struck her. The intervention by Rodriguez and his team had not just prevented a physical altercation, but had created an opportunity for genuine growth and learning that had benefited everyone in the program. Marcus approached her during the final week of training, clearly wanting to have a more extended conversation about their shared experience. "Sarah," he said, "I wanted to talk to you about what happened between us, and about what I've learned since then." Sarah nodded, curious to hear his perspective on the transformation she had witnessed in his behavior and attitudes. "I've noticed the changes in how you approach teamwork and leadership. You've become one of the most supportive teammates in the program." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk about," Marcus replied. "I realized that my anger that day wasn't really about you at all. It was about my own insecurities and my fear that the military I thought I knew was changing in ways I didn't understand. But working with you over these past weeks has shown me that those changes are making us stronger, not weaker." His honesty was both refreshing and insightful, and Sarah found herself appreciating the depth of his self-reflection. "I think fear of change is natural," she said. "But what matters is how we respond to that fear. You chose to examine your assumptions and adjust your perspective based on new information. That takes real courage." Marcus smiled at her response. "Rodriguez told me something that day that really stuck with me. He said that the best teams are made up of people who challenge each other to be better, not people who all think the same way. Working with you has challenged me to be a better service member and a better person." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the training instructors, who were gathering the recruits for their final evaluation briefing. As they walked toward the assembly area together, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a moment of potential violence had evolved into an opportunity for genuine growth and understanding. The final evaluation results, announced later that day, reflected the positive changes that had taken place within the group. Sarah graduated at the top of her class, but equally importantly, the overall performance of all recruits had improved significantly compared to previous training cycles. The instructors specifically noted the exceptional teamwork and mutual support that had characterized the later phases of the program. During the graduation ceremony, Rodriguez and his team were present as honored guests, representing the operational reality that the recruits would soon be facing. When Rodriguez presented Sarah with her completion certificate, he spoke briefly about the importance of leadership that brings out the best in others. Special operations success depends on teams that can function effectively under any circumstances, he said. The leadership you've demonstrated here suggests that you'll be an asset to whatever unit you're assigned to. But remember that real leadership is measured not by your individual achievements, but by your ability to help your entire team succeed. As the ceremony concluded, and the graduates prepared to move on to their next assignments, Sarah found herself surrounded by fellow recruits who wanted to express their appreciation for her leadership and support throughout the program. Marcus was among them, and his words carried particular significance given the journey they had shared. You didn't just prove that women belong in special operations, he told her. You proved that excellence comes in many forms, and that the best teams are built on mutual respect and shared commitment to something bigger than ourselves. I'm proud to have served with you, and I hope we have the opportunity to work together again in the future. Looking back on the entire experience, Sarah realized that the confrontation that had seemed so threatening at the time had actually been the catalyst for the most meaningful learning experience of her military career. The intervention by Rodriguez and his team had prevented immediate harm, but more importantly, it had created space for the kind of honest dialogue and personal growth that rarely occurred in normal training environments. The lessons learned that day about teamwork, leadership, and the importance of focusing on mission success rather than personal prejudices would continue to influence her approach to military service throughout her career. But perhaps most significantly, she had witnessed firsthand how the right kind of leadership could transform conflict into opportunity and turn potential enemies into dedicated allies. As she prepared to leave the training facility for her first operational assignment, Sarah carried with her not only the technical skills and tactical knowledge she had acquired during the program, but also a deep appreciation for the power of principled leadership and the possibility of positive change even in the most challenging circumstances.